The first scream shattered the silence before anyone noticed the bride wasn't crying. Crystal chandeliers bathed the grand ballroom of the Belladonna estate in warm gold, reflecting off polished marble floors and towering arrangements of white orchids. Hundreds of guests, politicians, CEOs, diplomats, and men whose names never appeared in newspapers rose from their seats in confusion. For one suspended heartbeat, no one moved. Then every bodyguard reached for a weapon. Chloe Bennett stood frozen at the edge of the aisle, her clipboard slipping from her fingers and striking the marble with a sharp crack that echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. She hadn't meant to ruin anything. She had only been looking for the bride's emergency veil. Instead, she had found a black leather folder hidden beneath a velvet chair in the bridal suite. Inside were photographs, satellite maps, financial records, a federal identification card. The name printed across the badge still burned behind her eyes. Special Agent Isabella Laurent. The woman about to marry Vincenzo Romano wasn't a bride. She was undercover FBI. Now everyone knew. The silence collapsed into chaos. Gunfire didn't erupt, not yet, but dozens of pistols appeared as if the room itself had grown teeth. Black-suited guards surrounded the altar in perfect formation, while terrified guests stumbled backward, overturning chairs and scattering crystal glasses across the floor. The orchestra stopped in the middle of a violin note. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else bolted for the exit. No one made it farther than 3 steps. Massive oak doors slammed shut. Steel security locks engaged with a heavy metallic thud. No one was leaving. Chloe's pulse hammered against her ribs. She hadn't planned weddings for mafia families because she enjoyed danger. She had taken the job because Belladonna events paid triple what ordinary clients offered, and medical bills for her mother didn't disappear simply because life became frightening. She was good at what she did. Better than good. She remembered every flower delivery, every seating arrangement, every dietary restriction, every backup generator, every emergency exit. Control was how she survived. But there was no checklist for exposing a federal agent moments before she married the most feared crime boss in America. Across the room, Isabella slowly lowered her bouquet. The soft smile she'd worn all morning disappeared. In its place stood someone colder, someone trained. Her eyes swept across the ballroom, calculating distances, exits, angles. She wasn't looking at her groom. She was measuring survival. At the altar, Vincenzo Romano hadn't moved, not even an inch. 6'4", perfectly tailored black tuxedo, dark hair brushed neatly back. His expression remained unreadable, almost serene, while panic spread around him like wildfire. That frightened Chloe more than the guns. Stories about Vincenzo circulated through Chicago like urban legends. Entire organizations vanished after crossing him. Judges resigned overnight. Witnesses disappeared. Men twice his age lowered their voices whenever they spoke his name. Yet he simply stood there, watching, thinking. His gray eyes drifted from Isabella to Chloe. Their gaze met. The distance between them stretched across the cathedral-sized ballroom, yet Chloe felt as though he had stepped directly in front of her. She forgot to breathe. There was no rage in his face, no visible shock, only quiet calculation, as if he had already accepted that this moment had been inevitable. A sharp click echoed behind Isabella. She turned. One of Vincenzo's captains aimed a pistol directly at her heart. "Boss," the captain said quietly. One word. The ballroom became impossibly still. Everyone understood what that meant. One command, one trigger, one body on the marble floor. Isabella never bake ill. Instead, she looked directly at Vincenzo. "I suppose this is where the fairy tale ends." His voice was calm enough to freeze the room. There was never a fairy tale. Before anyone could move, another sound cut through the silence. A phone vibrated. Not one, dozens. Men throughout the ballroom reached into their jackets almost simultaneously. Expressions changed. Confusion replaced anger. One by one, they looked toward Vincenzo. News had arrived. The Alliance headquarters in New Jersey had just exploded. Multiple mafia leaders had been assassinated within minutes of one another. The wedding had never been the objective. It had been the distraction. Vincenzo's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Someone had used the ceremony to gather the heads of nearly every major family under one roof. Someone intended to erase them all. He slowly looked back at Isabella. You weren't here to destroy my family. No, you were trying to stop whoever planned this. She gave the smallest nod. For months, the realization settled across the ballroom like winter. Every man present had been hunting the wrong enemy. Then someone shouted, "She's lying." A gun fired. The bullet wasn't aimed at Isabella. It was aimed at Vincenzo. Time fractured. Chloe never consciously decided to move. She simply reacted. The heavy wedding planning binder still rested in her hands. She swung it upward instinctively. The hardcover exploded as the bullet struck it, sending paper into the air like white birds. The impact threw her backward. Vincenzo caught her before she hit the floor. For one impossible second, the ballroom vanished. She became aware only of his arm around her waist, the scent of cedar and smoke clinging to his jacket, and the astonishing steadiness of his breathing amid the chaos. "You intercepted a bullet," he said quietly. "I think," Chloe whispered, still stunned. "Your paperwork just saved your life." A flicker so brief she almost imagined it crossed his face. Not amusement, recognition. Then hell arrived. The ballroom windows exploded inward. Masked gunmen poured through shattered glass. Guests screamed. Bodyguards returned fire. Marble columns splintered beneath automatic weapons. White orchids rained across the blood-speckled floor. Someone pulled the fire alarm. Water cascaded from the ceiling, soaking tuxedos, gowns, and shattered rose petals until the elegant wedding resembled the aftermath of a battlefield. Vincenzo's security team closed around him instantly. Protect the boss. But he wasn't watching the attackers. He was watching Chloe. She crouched behind an overturned banquet table, shielding a terrified flower girl with her own body. Bullets tore through expensive tablecloths only inches above her head. Most people would have run. She stayed where the child was, without hesitation, without calculation, as though fear came second to compassion. Something inside Vincenzo shifted, only slightly, enough to notice. 3 gunmen broke through the eastern entrance. One spotted Chloe. "She's the planner!" Another shouted, "Kill the witness!" Before they could raise their rifles, Vincenzo stepped between them. His pistol appeared almost lazily in his hand. 3 shots. 3 echoes. 3 bodies hit polished marble. Silence followed. Not because the fighting had ended, because everyone nearby understood exactly why those men had died. They hadn't threatened the Mafia Boss. They had threatened the woman standing behind him. Chloe stared. "You," her voice barely existed. "You saved me." Without looking away from the hallway, Vincenzo answered in the same controlled tone. "No, I protected what belongs inside my house." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they unsettled her. She wasn't sure whether she'd just been rescued, or claimed. Outside, the deep growl of engines rolled across the rain-soaked grounds. Black SUVs surrounded the estate from every direction. Whoever had orchestrated the attack clearly wasn't finished. Vincenzo slipped a fresh magazine into his pistol with practiced ease. When he finally looked at Chloe again, something unreadable flickered in his pale gray eyes. "This wedding," he said softly, "is over." He offered her his hand. "But your nightmare is only beginning." And for reasons she could not explain, not logic, not fear, not even survival, Chloe took it. As another explosion shook the estate, the massive cathedral doors burst inward, revealing figures emerging through smoke and rain. The war that had been planned in secret for years had finally begun. And somehow, the ordinary wedding planner now stood at the very center of it. Rain poured over Belladonna Estate so heavily that the world beyond its iron gates disappeared into a gray blur. Lightning illuminated the long line of black SUVs surrounding the mansion like silent predators waiting for permission to attack. Inside, the wedding had become a battlefield. Crystal chandeliers swung overhead as smoke drifted through the grand ballroom. White orchids lay crushed beneath shattered champagne glasses. Marble floors that had reflected elegance only minutes ago were streaked with water, broken glass, and abandoned bouquets. Chloe Bennett stood motionless. Her fingers still trembled inside Vincenzo Romano's hand. She had planned hundreds of weddings. She had calmed nervous brides, solved impossible disasters, rescued forgotten rings. Never, not once, had she imagined she would leave a ceremony beside the groom while armed men exchanged gunfire around them. A sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. Boss, Marco De Luca, Vincenzo's longtime consigliere, hurried across the ballroom, blood running down one sleeve of his charcoal suit. His normally composed face carried an expression Chloe couldn't quite identify. Concern. Not for himself. For Vincenzo? We have less than 3 minutes. Vincenzo never looked away from Chloe. I know. They're closing every road. I know. The Eastern security team is gone. I know. Marco hesitated. Then his gaze shifted toward Chloe. And she's the reason every family in this city will come after us. Silence settled between them. Chloe slowly withdrew her hand. I'll leave. Both men looked at her. If I'm the problem, she whispered, I'll disappear. Marco's jaw tightened. You can't. She frowned. What do you mean I can't? Before Marco answered, Vincenzo finally spoke. You exposed an undercover federal operation in front of every mafia leader in America. His calm voice carried no anger, only facts. The FBI will believe you helped us. He paused. Our enemies will believe you helped them. Another pause. My allies will believe you betrayed me. The realization settled over Chloe like ice. No matter where you go, Vincenzo's gray eyes held hers. Someone will want you dead. Outside, the first rocket struck the eastern wall. The explosion shook the entire estate. Windows burst inward. Guests screamed. One of the marble statues collapsed into the courtyard. Move! Marco grabbed his radio. They're bringing military weapons. Vincenzo's security detail instantly formed around him, but instead of stepping toward the armored convoy waiting outside, Vincenzo turned back toward Chloe. She stood frozen, not because she was weak, because her entire life had changed in less than 10 minutes. You have a mother? He asked quietly. She nodded. Yes. Where? My apartment in Lincoln Park. Marco answered before Chloe could say anything else. We already sent men. She stared at him. You what? They arrived 8 minutes ago. My mother doesn't even know who you are. They don't need to. Panic spread across Chloe's face. You can't just... Vincenzo interrupted gently. They aren't there to frighten her. They're protecting her. You don't understand. My mother will think... She'll think wealthy clients hired security after the attack. He stepped closer. They've already moved her. The color drained from Chloe's face. You moved my mother? To a hospital we own. You own a hospital? Marco answered with absolute seriousness. We own 6. Another explosion echoed outside. This one much closer. The ballroom lights flickered. Emergency generators activated. Red security lighting flooded the room, transforming white wedding decorations into something haunting. The elegant ballroom now looked like a cathedral at the end of the world. One of Vincenzo's captains rushed toward him. They've breached the gardens. Numbers? Forte. Professional? Very... Vincenzo nodded once. No amateur. The captain hesitated. They're asking for the wedding planner. Every conversation stopped. Even Marco slowly turned toward Chloe. The captain swallowed. They aren't asking for you, boss. They're demanding. He looked directly at Chloe. Here. Chloe's heartbeat thundered. Why? No one answered. Because no one knew. Not yet. Miles away. Inside a dark limousine overlooking Belladonna Estate, a silver-haired man watched the burning mansion through rain-covered windows. His expensive Italian suit remained perfectly pressed. His expression never changed. On the screen beside him appeared Chloe Bennett's driver's license photograph. Average height. Wedding planner. No criminal history. No political connections. No known relationship with organized crime. The old man smiled. So, he murmured. He finally found someone. One of his bodyguards frowned. Sir? The old man ignored him. Instead, he gently traced Chloe's photograph with one finger. I wondered what kind of woman would make Vincenzo hesitate. Another explosion illuminated his face. Now I know. He closed the folder. Bring her to me. His bodyguard asked quietly. Alive? The old man smiled again. If possible, and if Romano refuses? The answer came without emotion. Burn his empire to the ground. Back at Belladonna Estate, the underground tunnel entrance lay hidden beneath the estate's private wine cellar. Massive steel doors slid open with a low mechanical groan. Chloe stared. This, Marco gestured ahead. Emergency evacuation route. She blinked. This is bigger than the subway. It was built during the Cold War. The tunnel stretched endlessly beneath Chicago, illuminated by soft amber lighting. Luxury SUVs already waited inside, engines running. Nothing about Vincenzo Romano's world resembled anything Chloe understood. As they hurried toward the vehicles, she noticed something strange. Dozens of armed guards lined both sides of the tunnel. Every one of them lowered their heads slightly as Vincenzo passed. Not from fear, from loyalty. No one spoke. No one questioned. He acknowledged none of them. Leadership wasn't performed. It was simply accepted. Halfway to the convoy, gunfire erupted again. The attackers had somehow entered the tunnel. Marco cursed under his breath. They found the access point. Bodyguards rushed forward, weapons drawn. A young guard, barely older than 20, stumbled backward after taking a bullet to the shoulder. Without thinking, Chloe ran toward him. Medic. No one moved. Everyone remained focused on the firefight. She dropped to her knees. Help me. The wounded guard struggled to breathe. Blood soaked through his uniform. Years of caring for her chronically ill mother had taught Chloe more first aid than she ever expected to know. She ripped fabric from her own bridesmaid emergency scarf, pressing hard against the wound. Stay with me. The guard looked terrified. I don't want to die. You won't. I promise my sister. His breathing faltered. I'd come home. Chloe squeezed his hand. You will. Vincenzo watched everything. The bullets. The chaos. The screaming. Yet somehow, his attention remained fixed on the woman kneeling beside one of his men. She didn't know the guard. Didn't know his name. Didn't know he had once worked as an enforcer. She only saw someone bleeding and chose compassion over safety. Marco noticed the look in Vincenzo's eyes. Dangerous. Not because of anger, because something infinitely more complicated had begun. The firefight ended almost as quickly as it had begun. The surviving attackers retreated. The tunnel fell quiet, except for distant sirens above. Chloe leaned back, exhausted. The young guard was alive. Barely. A medic finally rushed over. You saved him. She smiled weakly. I just slowed the bleeding. The medic looked at her with quiet respect. No, you gave him a chance. As Chloe stood, she realized Vincenzo was only a few feet away. He had watched everything. Neither of them spoke. For several long seconds, the sounds of engines and distant thunder filled the silence between them. Finally, you always do that? What? Risk yourself. She looked away. I didn't think. I noticed. His answer was almost amused. She frowned. Is that supposed to be a compliment? It depends. On what? He stepped closer. So far. His voice remained calm. Everyone who has protected me has been paid. Another step. You are the first who did it without expecting anything. Their eyes met. For the briefest moment, the tunnel seemed to disappear. No gunfire. No VAR. No bodyguards. Only silence. Only two strangers standing far too close. Then Marco's phone rang. He answered immediately. His expression hardened. He looked toward Vincenzo. Boss. There was something different in his voice now. Something even Marco rarely showed. Unease. They found out who leaked Agent Laurent's identity. Chloe's heart stopped. It wasn't Chloe. Marco nodded slowly. No. He lowered the phone. It came from inside our own organization. The realization struck everyone at once. Someone inside Vincenzo Romano's empire had orchestrated the wedding's collapse. Someone had framed Chloe before she had ever stepped into the bridal suite. And that meant the attack had never been about the undercover bride. It had been about drawing Vincenzo into a trap and ensuring that an innocent wedding planner took the blame while the true traitor disappeared into the shadows. As the convoy engines roared to life and the armored doors sealed behind them, Chloe glanced at Vincenzo. For the first time since the nightmare had begun, she saw something she hadn't thought possible in the eyes of Chicago's most feared mafia boss. Not fear, not rage, suspicion, because if someone inside his own family had betrayed him once, they could do it again. And Chloe was now trapped in the middle of a war where she no longer knew who could be trusted. The convoy disappeared into Chicago's rain before dawn. From the outside, the vehicles looked identical black armored SUVs with tinted windows and unremarkable license plates. Inside, however, every passenger knew they were racing against an invisible enemy. Chloe sat in the back seat beside a reinforced window, her wedding planner blazer draped over her lap. Tiny flecks of dried blood stained one sleeve, the young guard's blood, not hers. She couldn't stop staring at it. Less than 2 hours ago, she'd been adjusting centerpieces and calming nervous bridesmaids. Now she was riding through the city with the most feared mafia boss in America, while half the criminal underworld wanted her dead. Across from her, Vincenzo Romano remained silent. He hadn't touched the tablet in his hands, hadn't answered the dozens of encrypted calls flashing across the screen. He simply watched the rain race down the glass. Marco finally broke the silence. The traitor knew the evacuation routes. Vincenzo nodded once. They knew the tunnel. They knew the timing. They knew where the snipers were positioned. Another pause. They knew our wedding security better than my own captains. Chloe looked between them. You keep saying the traitor. Marco met her eyes. We've already ruled out more than 90% of our people. You did that? Already? We've been doing this a long time. His tone wasn't arrogant. It was simply true. Vincenzo finally spoke. The question isn't who betrayed me. His gaze drifted toward the city skyline emerging through the rain. It's why. The house no one knew existed. 40 minutes later, the convoy left downtown Chicago and entered a quiet neighborhood overlooking Lake Michigan. The streets were empty. Old maple trees lined the sidewalks. The homes looked ordinary. Children's bicycles rested beside driveways. Porch lights glowed warmly against the fading storm. Nothing about the neighborhood suggested it belonged to one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country. The lead SUV stopped in front of a 2-story gray house with white shutters. Chloe blinked. This is your safe house? Marco smiled faintly. No. She frowned. No? This is one of 43. Her eyes widened. 43? Vincenzo stepped out first. The safest places, he said quietly, are the ones nobody notices. Inside, the house looked almost painfully normal. A cozy living room, family photographs, a piano, children's books neatly arranged on low shelves, fresh bread cooling on the kitchen counter. Chloe turned slowly. This doesn't make any sense. It isn't supposed to. Marco removed his jacket. If people imagine mafia hideouts as underground bunkers full of weapons, he gestured around the room. They'll never search a suburban home. An elderly woman emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of tea. She looked no older than 70. Soft silver hair, gentle smile, cardigan, house slippers. Oh, she said warmly. You must be Chloe. Chloe stared. You know my name? The woman laughed softly. I know everyone's name. She placed the tray on the table before looking at Vincenzo. You skipped dinner again. I was getting married. You were getting married, she corrected. Now you're getting scolded. For the first time, Chloe witnessed something almost impossible. Vincenzo Romano looked mildly embarrassed. The elderly woman extended her hand. I'm Elena. Chloe shook it. Do you work for him? Elena smiled. I raised him. Silence. Chloe looked at Vincenzo. He looked away. Marco chuckled. She's the only person alive who has permission to tell him he's being an idiot. Elena folded her arms. And I use that permission often. Despite everything that had happened, Chloe found herself smiling. It disappeared a second later when she noticed 2 armed guards standing quietly in the hallway. Even here, danger never seemed far away. A different side of the monster. Later that evening, Chloe stood alone on the back porch. Rain still fell lightly over the lake. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, trying to convince herself that everything she'd experienced was real. The screen door creaked open behind her. "You should be sleeping." She turned. Vincenzo, still wearing the same black tuxedo jacket. Only now it was stained with dust and faint traces of smoke. She gave a tired smile. "I don't think that's happening tonight." He stepped beside her. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It simply existed between them. Finally, Chloe asked, "Did you love her?" He didn't answer immediately. "The bride. I know who you meant." He watched the lake. "No, you were still going to marry her." "Yes." "Why?" His answer came quietly. "Peace." She frowned. "I thought the marriage was about uniting families." "It was. And peace." His expression remained unreadable. "For men like me," he said, "peace is usually negotiated with signatures." He glanced toward her. This time it was supposed to be vows. She looked at him carefully. "So you were willing to marry someone you didn't love?" His eyes held hers for a long moment. "Love has never been a luxury my world could afford." Something about the way he said it made Chloe's chest tighten. For the first time, she didn't see the feared mafia boss. She saw a lonely man who had spent years making impossible choices because everyone else expected him to. The photograph. Inside the house, Marco entered a secure office where analysts had transformed the dining room into a temporary command center. Maps covered one wall. Dozens of surveillance monitors flickered. Encrypted radios buzzed constantly. A young intelligence officer hurried toward him. "We recovered something." "What?" "A security camera from the bridal suite." Marco took the tablet. The footage began playing. Chloe entered the bridal suite. She searched for the emergency veil exactly as expected. Then, the recording glitched. 8 seconds disappeared. When the image returned, the FBI folder was already lying open. Marco frowned. "Replay it." Again, the same missing 8 seconds. Someone had edited the footage. Someone wanted it to appear that Chloe had discovered the folder naturally. But that wasn't what happened. Someone had placed it directly in front of her. She had been chosen. Not randomly. Deliberately. Midnight visitor. At 2:17 a.m., one of the perimeter alarms sounded. Every light in the house switched off instantly. Emergency systems activated. Guards flooded every hallway. Marco's voice echoed through hidden speakers. Lockdown. Chloe barely had time to stand before Vincenzo appeared outside the guest room. No questions. His voice was calm. "Come with me." She followed without hesitation. They descended a narrow staircase concealed behind a bookshelf. Another hidden room. Concrete walls. Emergency generators. Medical supplies. A reinforced steel door. "This place has another bunker?" "It has 3. She stared. "You really don't trust anyone." "I trust very few." He looked directly at her. "I'm beginning to wonder if trusting anyone is a mistake." Before she could respond, a loud knock echoed through the steel entrance. Not gunfire. Knocking. 3 slow knocks. Then 2. Marco froze. His face lost all color. "No," he whispered. Vincenzo's expression hardened. "Open the camera." The security monitor flickered to life. Standing outside the front door, alone, without bodyguards, without weapons, was Isabella Laurent, still wearing her torn wedding dress. Rain soaked the white fabric until it clung heavily to the ground. Blood stained one shoulder. She looked exhausted, broken. She raised empty hands toward the security camera. "I know you don't trust me." Her voice crackled through the speaker. "But if you don't let me in," she glanced over her shoulder into the darkness, "we're all going to die." Before anyone could react, a crimson laser sight appeared on Isabella's chest. Then another. Then 5 more. Snipers, hidden somewhere beyond the trees, watching the house, watching the front door, watching everyone inside. Vincenzo didn't hesitate. He turned to Marco. Get everyone into defensive positions. Marco nodded. And Chloe? For the first time that night, Vincenzo reached for Chloe's hand not as a romantic gesture, but with quiet certainty. His grip was firm, protective, resolute. He looked at her with the same calm intensity that had unsettled her from the moment they'd met. No matter what happens next, he said, you stay beside me. Outside, thunder rolled over the lake. Then the first sniper fired. The bullet shattered the front porch light, plunging the house into darkness. And the war followed the sound of breaking glass. The shattered porch light left the entire street in darkness. For one suspended heartbeat, the only sound was rain striking the roof. Then came the second shot. The bullet slammed into the stone column beside Isabella Laurent, showering her torn wedding dress with fragments of concrete. She didn't flinch. She simply stood there, hands raised, waiting. Inside the safe house, every weapon was aimed toward the front entrance. Marco's voice remained calm despite the tension tightening every face around him. Thermals show 6 snipers. Pause. No. The tablet refreshed. 12. Another refresh. 18. One of Vincenzo's captains cursed under his breath. This isn't an execution. It's a Ziga. Vincenzo never took his eyes off the security monitor. Whoever is outside doesn't care whether Isabella lives. Marco nodded grimly. They only care that we open the door. Open it. Every head in the command room turned toward Vincenzo. Marco frowned. Boss. Open the door. She could be wired. She could. She could be leading them here. She could. Marco stepped closer, lowering his voice. And Chloe? The room fell silent. For the first time since the wedding, Vincenzo glanced toward Chloe. She stood wrapped in a borrowed sweater, her damp hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She looked exhausted, frightened. Yet she hadn't once asked to leave, hadn't once demanded explanations. She was simply trying to understand a world that had swallowed her overnight. Vincenzo's answer came quietly. We don't leave people outside to die. Marco studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I'll cover the entrance. The reinforced steel door unlocked with a deep mechanical click. 2 bodyguards pushed it open just enough. The moment Isabella stepped inside, bullets tore across the front porch. Glass exploded. Wood splintered. The heavy door slammed shut again. The impacts echoed through the house like thunder. Isabella collapsed onto the floor, breathing hard. Her wedding veil was gone. Her shoulder bled through torn lace. She looked nothing like the composed federal agent Chloe had seen at the altar. She looked hunted. A different truth. Elena hurried forward with a medical kit. Sit down. I'm fine. No. The older woman gently pressed Isabella into a chair. You'll argue after I stop the bleeding. Chloe instinctively stepped beside them. Here. She handed Elena fresh gauze. For a brief moment, neither woman remembered who the other was supposed to be. Not an FBI agent. Not the woman whose identity had destroyed the wedding. Just someone injured. Isabella looked up. You still helped me. Chloe blinked. You would have done the same. A faint smile touched Isabella's lips. No, I probably wouldn't have. Across the room, Vincenzo finally spoke. You have exactly 1 minute. His voice remained calm. Convince me you didn't bring death to my door. Isabella met his eyes without hesitation. I didn't. You always lie professionally. So do you. Marco shifted uneasily. Nobody interrupted. Isabella reached slowly inside her torn dress. Half the room raised their weapons. She stopped immediately. It's a flash drive. Throw it. She slid the small device across the floor. Marco picked it up before inserting it into a secure laptop. Dozens of encrypted files appeared. Photographs, financial transfers, shipping routes, satellite image. Then, a single name, Leonardo Salazar. Marco's expression changed instantly. No, Vincenzo remained perfectly still. Only his eyes narrowed. The ghost of Chicago, Leonardo Salazar. The name hadn't been spoken openly in nearly a decade. To most people, he no longer existed. Years earlier, he had disappeared after a violent conflict between rival organizations. Everyone assumed he was dead. Apparently, everyone had been wrong. Isabella folded her shaking hands. He built a new network. Marco continued scrolling. The numbers made his face pale. Weapons, private armies, corrupt officials, international accounts. He spent 10 years preparing. She nodded. Tonight wasn't about your wedding. It was about eliminating every leader capable of stopping him. Chloe listened quietly from the corner. She understood almost none of the criminal politics. But she understood one thing. Someone powerful had manipulated everyone. The FBI, the mafia, the politicians attending the wedding, even her. She whispered almost to herself. I was never supposed to plan a wedding. No one answered, because she was right. The file. Marco opened another folder. A surveillance report. Then another. Then another. Suddenly, the room became strangely quiet. Marco stopped scrolling. His eyes lifted slowly toward Chloe. Boss. Vincenzo looked over. What? Marco turned the laptop. These aren't surveillance files on the wedding. Vincenzo stepped closer. His expression remained unreadable. Then, for the first time that night, his composure cracked. Only slightly. But Chloe noticed. Every photograph was of her, walking to work, buying groceries, leaving the hospital with her mother, drinking coffee, reading on a park bench. Hundreds of pictures, taken over years. Her breath caught. What? She whispered. What is this? Nobody answered immediately, because one fact became terrifyingly clear. Someone had been watching Chloe, long before the wedding. Not his men. Chloe looked directly at Vincenzo. Did you do this? Silence. His answer came immediately. No. She searched his face. There was no hesitation, no attempt to avoid the question. He sounded almost offended. Marco spoke quietly. The timestamps. He enlarged one image. 5 years ago. Another. 3 years. Another. 8 months. Vincenzo looked at Isabella. You've seen these before? She shook her head. Never. Chloe felt the room spinning. I don't understand. I've never met any of you. Her voice trembled. Why would anyone follow me? No one had an answer. A name she knew. Isabella opened one final encrypted folder. Inside sat a scanned birth certificate. Chloe frowned. That's impossible. It was hers. But something was different. The father's name was missing. Below it appeared a handwritten note. Find the girl before Romano does. The signature beneath it read, L. Salazar. The room froze. Marco slowly closed the laptop. Boss. His voice had become almost inaudible. I don't think Chloe was caught in the middle. Vincenzo didn't respond. Marco finished anyway. I think. He looked toward Chloe. She has always been the destination. A promise. The house fell silent once more. Outside, the rain had finally begun to ease. Inside, Chloe wrapped her arms around herself. Everything she believed about her life had begun to unravel. Her father had died when she was a child. Her mother had never spoken much about the past. Now strangers possessed years of surveillance. A missing name, a hidden file, questions with no answers. She looked toward Vincenzo. I don't even know who I am anymore. He crossed the room slowly. Stopping just in front of her, he spoke with the same measured calm that had steadied every crisis since they met. You are Chloe Bennett. She looked up. Nothing in that file changes the woman you've chosen to become. For the first time, the distance between them felt smaller. Not because danger had disappeared, because certainty had. His hand lifted instinctively, almost touching her cheek. Then he stopped himself. His fingers closed into a fist before they reached her skin. The restraint hurt more than any embrace could have. He lowered his hand. I won't let anyone use you. It wasn't a dramatic vow. It wasn't shouted. It was simply a promise. The kind of promise a man like Vincenzo Romano would kill to keep. Far across the city, in the penthouse of an unfinished skyscraper, Leonardo Salazar stood before a wall of monitors. Every screen showed a different camera angle surrounding the quiet suburban neighborhood. He smiled as one image settled on Chloe's face. So, he murmured, you survived. An assistant approached. Should we launch another assault? Leonardo shook his head. No. Why? He picked up an old silver pocket watch, turning it thoughtfully in his hand. Because she's finally standing exactly where I wanted her. He looked toward the glowing skyline of Chicago, and sooner or later, his smile faded into something colder. Vincenzo Romano will have to choose. The Empire, he whispered, or the woman. Morning arrived without sunlight. A blanket of gray clouds hung over Lake Michigan, swallowing the horizon and leaving the safe house wrapped in an uneasy silence. No one had slept. The kitchen table was covered with laptops, surveillance photographs, encrypted files, and empty coffee cups. The warmth of the house had vanished, replaced by the quiet efficiency of a command center. Chloe stood by the window, staring at the neighborhood outside. Children waited for a school bus at the end of the street. A man walked his golden retriever. A mail carrier delivered letters as though the world hadn't changed overnight. It felt impossible that, only a few feet away, armed guards watched every approach to the house. Two worlds existed side by side. One ordinary, one soaked in secrets. And somehow, she belonged to neither. Questions without answers. Elena placed a mug of tea in Chloe's hands. You've been standing there for 20 minutes. I know. What are you thinking about? Chloe let out a quiet laugh. I'm trying to remember what my biggest problem was 3 days ago. Elena smiled gently. Do you? My mother's medical bills. A pause. A bride who couldn't decide between ivory and white roses. Another pause. And whether I'd ever have enough money to open my own wedding studio. She looked down into her cup. Now, I don't even know if my name is real. Elena reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Names matter, but choices matter more. The missing pieces. In the dining room, Marco connected the recovered flash drive to an isolated server. Lines of encrypted code scrolled across the screen. One by one, hidden folders unlocked. Shipping manifests, financial ledgers, photographs, old newspaper clippings. Then, a faded photograph appeared. The room fell silent. It showed a much younger Leonardo Salazar standing beside another man outside a small neighborhood restaurant. Marco zoomed in. The second man's face was familiar. Tu familiar. Chloe stepped closer. Her breath caught. No. She whispered the words before she even understood why. The man in the photograph looked exactly like the smiling face she remembered from childhood. Her father, Daniel Bennett. The story she never knew. No. Chloe shook her head. My father fixed heating systems. He wasn't involved with criminals. Marco remained silent. Isabella leaned closer to the screen. Check the date. Marco enlarged the newspaper clipping attached to the image. 28 years earlier, long before Chloe had been born, long before Leonardo became one of the most feared names in organized crime, another file opened automatically. An audio recording. Static crackled through old speakers. A man's voice emerged. Young, confident. If anything happens to me. Static. Promise me the child never learned who I worked for. Another burst of interference. I want her to have a normal life. The recording ended. Chloe covered her mouth. She knew that voice. Every bedtime story, every birthday memory, every old home video. It was her father. Not a criminal. The room remained silent until Vincenzo finally spoke. He wasn't asking to protect himself. Marco nodded. He was protecting her. Another document appeared. Employment records. Daniel Bennett had worked as an accountant. Not for a mafia family. For a charitable foundation. The foundation had secretly been used by Leonardo Salazar to launder money. Daniel discovered the truth. Instead of helping, he copied financial records and prepared to report everything to federal authorities. He disappeared before he could testify. The official investigation concluded that he had died in a traffic accident, but the files told another story. He had been murdered, not because he was loyal to Leonardo, because he had tried to stop him. The real reason. Isabella slowly connected the final pieces. Leonardo spent years searching for Daniel's records. Marco nodded. He never found them. She looked toward Chloe, so he watched the only person who might know where Daniel hid them. Chloe stared blankly. I was 6 years old. Exactly. You couldn't reveal a secret you didn't know. Vincenzo folded his arms. But Leonardo believed one day you would remember. Silence settled over the room. For years, she hadn't been followed because of who she was. She had been followed because of what someone believed she might unknowingly possess. A memory. Chloe closed her eyes. She tried to remember her father. Not the laughter. Not birthdays. Not Christmas mornings. Something else. Something older. A single memory surfaced. Rain. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her father kneeling in front of her with dirt on his hands. Smiling. One day, he had whispered, "If you ever feel completely lost." He handed her a tiny silver music box decorated with carved roses. Listen carefully. She opened her eyes. The room spun. The music box. Everyone looked at her. "My father gave me a music box." She frowned. "I still have it." Marco leaned forward. "Where?" "My mother's house." Vincenzo's expression darkened. "No." Chloe blinked. "What?" "If Leonardo spent 20 years watching you?" He looked directly at Marco. "He already knows about the music box." Marco understood immediately. "He'll send someone. Or already has." Too late. One of the analysts burst into the room. "Boss?" His breathing was uneven. "We've lost contact with the protective team at Mrs. Bennett's hospital." Every conversation stopped. "What happened?" No response. Another analyst interrupted. "The apartment building." He looked pale. "Someone broke in this morning. Nothing valuable was stolen. Only one object was missing. The old silver music box." The choice. The room erupted into activity. Guards reached for radios. Vehicles were prepared. Maps appeared across the monitors. Everyone spoke at once, except Vincenzo. He stood perfectly still, watching Chloe. She looked devastated. "I remember too late." Quiet tears rolled down her face. "If I'd remembered yesterday." She couldn't finish the sentence. Vincenzo stepped toward her. "This isn't your fault." "It is." "No." His voice remained steady. "The only guilty man is the one who stole your childhood." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Chloe whispered, "What happens now?" Vincenzo looked toward the city skyline, visible beyond the rain-soaked windows. "Now," he answered, "we stop reacting." He turned toward Marco. "Leonardo has spent 20 years making the first move." Marco nodded. "And now?" Vincenzo's gray eyes hardened with quiet resolve. "Now it's our turn." The end of running. Less than an hour later, the convoy prepared to leave the safe house. Chloe looked back at the cozy home that had briefly felt like the last peaceful place in her old life. She knew she would never return as the same person, not because she had entered the mafia's world, but because the truth had finally caught up with her. As the SUV door closed, Vincenzo sat beside her in silence. Neither reached for the other's hand. Neither spoke comforting words. They no longer needed to. Trust had not been declared. It had been built one difficult choice at a time. Outside, the gates opened. The convoy rolled toward downtown Chicago. Ahead of them waited a city filled with enemies, unanswered questions, and a man who had spent decades manipulating lives from the shadows. Behind them lay the life Chloe Bennett had once believed was ordinary. She looked forward, took a slow breath, and realized something unexpected. For the first time since the wedding, she was no longer running from the truth. She was driving toward it. And somewhere in the heart of Chicago, Leonardo Salazar smiled as the stolen music box rested on the desk before him. He turned the tiny brass key. A delicate melody filled the room. The tune played for exactly 12 seconds. Then it stopped. A hidden compartment clicked open. Inside was a single brass key. Leonardo picked it up carefully. Engraved on its surface were 4 simple words: Union Station, Locker 317. His smile slowly disappeared. If Daniel hid the evidence there, he murmured, the race has finally begun. The hunt was no longer about a forgotten past. It was about who would reach the truth first.